Hello, folks. We're down the line here from Cape Cod tonight with political analyst, author, and historian Dr. James D. Boyes. I'm Michael L. Roberts, and we're ditching the bells and whistles for the American Chronicle tonight to launch straight into the show, as it were, to bring you his analysis. So, James, thank you so much for being with us. I would very much like to ask you, as you can see here, the box has gone blue for Biden. Is that premature, or do you feel that Trump's and Giuliani's threats and otherwise of Supreme Court action in the coming weeks are futile at best?
No, I don't think that's futile at all or premature at all. I think that basically what you've seen over the last couple of days is a settling of ballots across the country. There is a reason that we've held off from doing this follow-up from the election to make sure that the ground had settled a little bit. It certainly it would have been premature to have discussed this in terms of a result only 36 hours ago. But now, quite frankly, the major networks have called this. And again, if you think about something we were saying on election night, one of the oddities about American politics is the extent to which these elections are called by the major networks. 20 odd years ago, it was Fox that basically helped George W. Bush become president by calling the election in Florida for him, arguably a little bit early. And bizarrely enough, now we've had Fox calling Arizona again very early in the night for, in this case, Joe Biden, which caused so much consternation in the Trump White House. But now all the major networks have called the election for now President-elect Biden. We've seen Joe Biden address the nation as President-elect. And he's now also been congratulated by former President George W. Bush, the only living former Republican president. So, this really is a question of when, not if, Trump is forced to concede this election one way or the other, and what he does with regard to that and his actions in the coming days and weeks will form a very important part of his legacy.
Mm. We finished our live US election coverage at 6 a.m. UK time. How would you assess the events that have unfolded since that point in terms of Trump's response or lack thereof and Biden's decorum throughout?
It's quite remarkable. I mean, it's been a very long 4 days. It's been a very long 4 years in many ways. We've almost become used to the kind of tantrums and tempestuous tweets of President Trump. The idea that they may now be a thing of the past seems quite extraordinary. And indeed, when Joe Biden has addressed the nation in very balanced tones, and he took to the airwaves last night here in the United States to speak for the first time as President-elect, it almost seems quite jarring to hear an American politician, an American President-elect speak in such a collective, calm manner, seeking to unite the country rather than divide the country. And I think you've seen that in an explosion of joy across so many American cities. Yesterday evening, the networks were cutting from city to city, showing this spontaneous outpouring of joy. And the only thing that it reminded me of is, the end sequence in the special edition of Return of a Jedi, when, it flashes from planet to planet to planet to demonstrate the sort of galactic joy at the overthrow of the emperor, the destruction of the second Death Star, and the end of the empire. I know that sounds a little bit melodramatic, but frankly, that was, the imagery was so similar. I think it's an appropriate one to reflect upon, quite frankly. The way in which people seem to be overjoyed that Donald Trump is no longer going to be president, at least on the political left. I realize that there are almost as many people, frankly, who are depressed as hell that President Trump has lost. He did garner over some 70 million votes, which is an astonishing amount, quite frankly. And we've seen, obviously, Joe Biden accrue even more to gain the most votes of any president in US history. So, any idea, any hopes that this election would somehow end the division in America, I think we can dismiss. This is a heavily polarized nation. We've seen it over the last 4 years. We've seen it over the course of the election, and we're certainly seeing it in the aftermath of the election. And I dare say, unfortunately, we will continue to see it not only through the interregnum leading up to the inauguration, but in the weeks, months, and arguably years of Joe Biden's presidency, almost irrespective of whatever he tries to do to reach out to Republican leaders on the Hill.
Mm. You bring up Return of the Jedi there, and of course we know in recent years that that's followed by from the Empire to the First Order. There's always another mountain to climb, another challenge. As such, to what extent is Joe Biden here facing something of an impossible task in terms of uniting the United States of America? You are on record as purposefully repeating the notion that Obama's speech, there are no blue states, red states, there are just the United States, lacks detail, as it were. What is Joe Biden facing as he takes on this effort to reunite the United States?
Well, I thought it was notable that in his address to the nation last night, the president-elect made direct reference to that concept, saying that he wouldn't see red states or blue states, only the United States. And again, it's a great line. The challenge is that there very clearly are red states and blue states, and within states, there are very clear blue areas and very clear red areas. You know, this nation has long been divided, arguably, between North and South, rich and poor, red states, blue states, urban areas, urban areas. So, you know, what Biden's trying to do, arguably, is something which has not arguably been achieved in American history. The challenges he faces also, it must be said, don't just come from Republicans, but from Democrats. We're already hearing members from what's often referred to as the left of the Democratic Party, personified by AOC, already lamenting Joe Biden's centrist credentials, and suggesting that, you know, he's going to have to govern from the left if he's going to get any hope of support from the progressives in the party. You know, this is, you know, a disaster, quite frankly, for the Democratic Party and for Joe Biden's presidency if he's held hostage by what many people would see as the progressive extreme left. That's no better than, you know, arguably a Republican president being held hostage by the Tea Party on the right of that party. So, you know, Joe Biden's going to have to try to govern from the center, because that is how American politics generally works, if anything's to be achieved. And what that could lead to ultimately is, if he's able to garner, and this is a big if he's able to garner support from independent and moderate Republicans, it's possible that he might be able to govern without support of a handful of very vocal progressives on the far left, and certainly without any support from the sort of Tea Party guys on the far right. Unfortunately, what that means, I think, is a continuation of government by executive order. We saw that under Obama. We saw that certainly under Donald Trump. And indeed, Joe Biden has already said that one of his first acts as president will be to sign a series of executive orders to overturn executive orders and decisions by Donald Trump, which will, amongst other things, basically ensure the United States re-engages with the Paris Climate Agreement, for example, and also a host of other issues, making sure that the dreamers, those American-born children of immigrants who've come here without paperwork, are permitted to stay in the United States. Suggestion that he's going to basically stop building the border wall, and a host of other issues. Basically, I think he's going to try to do for Trump what Trump tried to do for Obama, which is to sort of airbrush him from history just as quickly as possible. But any attempts to try and get legislation through, of course, will be stymied by opposition, not only from Republicans, but as I mentioned, also from his own Democratic Party.
So much to drill down into in that answer there. I'd like to start with the notion of the sheer scale of numbers of votes cast for each candidate in this situation. Is that as a result of the extreme reaction to both candidates, as a result of social media, or to what extent is it coronavirus and the mail-in ballots, meaning that more people were willing to mail in a vote than they were willing to stand in line?
So one of the things that we've talked about over the past several weeks and months is the ease or lack thereof of voting in the United States. It's not a nation that necessarily makes it particularly easy to vote. There are, of course, very simple ways to make sure that people do participate, and we've seen those put in place over the course of the last several weeks leading up to this election. One of them is to make sure that everybody gets a ballot, and we've seen in some states ballots being sent out to individuals, to the electorate who haven't actually requested them. Almost like, look, here we are, we're making this very easy for you, we're sending you a ballot, all you got to do is basically fill it in and send it back to us. And this, from a Democratic point of view, seems to have worked very, very well. The Republicans, I'm sure, will say it's worked terribly, and that it's opened up the United States for electoral fraud. Well, there's no evidence of electoral fraud at this point, and indeed one of the reasons that some of the voting has taken so long is because the individual states are simply not used to handling this many electoral result returns, which of course is in many cases involved having to go through millions of envelopes, opening them up, folding the papers out, putting them into different piles. When you consider that there's some, where are we? Some 70 million people voted for Donald Trump, 75 million people voted for Biden. And you can extrapolate from that a good portion of those were mail-ins. Just the physicality of doing this is obviously going to take some time. But what it has done is it's driven up participation to an extraordinary amount. We're seeing record turnouts, not only nationally, but at a state level. And, participation in a democracy is a good thing, quite frankly. But one of the challenges has always been, how do you do that? Well, maybe we found a way. The coronavirus certainly was the impetus for this. And it will be interesting to see whether, with a Democratic administration and what looks like it's going to be a Democratic-controlled House, whether there is a move now moving forward into the midterm elections in 2 years and then the next presidential election in 4 years, whether there is a determination to try to encourage greater uses of the mail-in process and perhaps, voting on the internet. We are in the year 2020. And the idea of having to wait for hours in line to put a tick in a box does seem a little antiquated here in one of the most technically advanced nations in the world, quite frankly. So this has been driven by the coronavirus. It's certainly been driven to an extent by very hard feelings with regard to this administration, but it's too easy to portray this as just a huge vote against Donald Trump, because as any Republican would point out, Donald Trump received 70 million votes, and in any other presidential election, pretty much that would have been sufficient to win very handsomely. So Donald Trump and the Republican Party remain extraordinarily popular in vast swathes of the country. It just happens that Joe Biden is even more popular in those areas where he was able to turn out the Democratic Party vote.
Digging into that popularity and the notion of the moderate Republican moving forward and their support for Joe Biden or otherwise, how do you think this is going to sort of level out in terms of those moderate Republicans who come to be seen as having enabled the worst angels of Donald Trump, as it were, and those moderate Republicans who you feel have held their ground and will be respected and considered allies of Biden moving forward?
I think there's going to be a series of distinct groups within the Republican Party. There are going to be those who will say all along, well, we were never Trumpers, and we were very adamant about it. And you'll have a very small number of those people who will be able to do so with some degree of credibility. Someone like Mitt Romney, for example, very much a moderate, is still going to be in the Senate. It'll be interesting to see whether Joe Biden reaches out to him, for example. He does need to pick a cabinet. Is it possible that he will choose someone like Mitt Romney as Secretary of State? Who knows? It would be a great way of trying to draw Republican support to his administration. Of course, the challenge with that is that anybody that Joe Biden does select and tries to work with will simply be accused of being what's known as a rhino, which is Republican in name only, by those to the right of the Republican Party, suggesting, oh, well, they were never truly a Republican anyway. Well, Mitt Romney was a Republican Party nominee for president in 2012. So you're going to see on the right of the party, however, this much more sort of visceral reaction to what's happened on Tuesday night and in the days following, which is to stand by the president. The challenge is that the president isn't going to make life easy for Joe Biden or for his efforts to bring unity to this country. I'd be staggered, frankly, if we hear a standard concession speech from the president. It would be lovely to think that he might suddenly do so, but there's nothing in President Trump's past that makes one think that he's going to stand before the podium and say, look, we fought a strong fight, we lost fair and square. I throw my support behind Joe Biden as president, and I urge my supporters to do likewise. The risk, I think, is that what happens at best is that Donald Trump gives a begrudging address to the nation in which he sort of says, well, look, I don't accept the result, I don't accept the ballot, but we've got nothing we can do about it. The courts are loaded against us, the media's loaded against us, we've been robbed. I will have to depart the office, but I will never stop fighting. And he'll effectively become almost like a UK-style opposition leader out there in the wilderness, screaming at the moon, but taking millions of voters with him who believe every word he says. And that will be amplified by his children, by Don and Eric. It will be amplified by people like Rudy Giuliani. These sort of people who've got nowhere else to go, quite frankly. They've pinned their entire futures to Donald Trump's political campaign. And if that goes down, then they go down. So the challenge you have, I think, is that the divisions in this country, which were evident before the election, and it's difficult to see how they get healed when you're going to have a former president out there not only decrying everything that Joe Biden does, but continuing, no doubt, to attempt to undermine his legitimacy, just as he did, it must be said, when Barack Obama was president, because this, of course, is the individual who was perhaps most responsible for perpetuating the whole birther movement, which in part gave rise to Donald Trump's political life in the first place.
To what extent was Donald Trump a Republican in name only? And besides the a sense of eventual begrudging concession and howling at the moon, as it were, what might be next for him as a public figure?
Well, this is one of the great, ironies is the right word, but certainly oddities of American political life at the moment, the way in which Donald Trump has so successfully taken over the Republican Party and made it in his image. This was the party that was very much in support of the United States military, very supportive of the United States military and its role. And of course, was very critical, for example, of Bill Clinton some 30 years ago when he became commander-in-chief, having never served in a military capacity in his life. And yet, obviously, Donald Trump managed to avoid service in Vietnam, claiming a medical ailment that apparently there's no great evidence of before or after. He's someone who was called members of the military losers and suckers, and yet seems to get strong support from the military. That seems to be very contradictory. And again, you would think any other individual within that party would have had a very hard time explaining that position with regard to the military. It's also the party which has a vast following within the evangelical movement. And yet here we are, it's a Sunday morning in the United States. Where is President Trump? He's on his golf course. Where's Joe Biden? Well, Joe Biden went to church. The idea that Donald Trump would go to church on a Sunday morning is, laughable. And yet he has managed to capture the evangelical votes. It really is a sea of contradictions, quite frankly, the way in which Donald Trump has captured the Republican Party, and with which the ease, apparently, with which so many Republicans have cast their lot in with him. Now, the extent to which that changes now, he's apparently been defeated and will be leaving office in January of next year, will remain to be seen. You could liken it to rats leaving a sinking ship in many ways, and the speed with which people start to distance themselves from Trump. But what does the future await for Donald Trump? Well, as a non-chief executive officer of the United States, of course, he will be in theory, open to the laws of the land. He has been protected by DOJ regulations that suggest that a sitting president cannot face legal charges. Well, that will clearly end. So the extent to which he might now face legal jeopardy for a variety of issues, some of which may come from some of the findings of the Mueller report. He may well find himself harassed through the courts by a number of women who have made a series of very serious allegations against his activities in the past. He may well find himself facing financial crisis because the Deutsche Bank, as I understand it, are eager to end their relationship with him. Right. If they start calling in loans, for example, that could very well place his entire company in jeopardy. The extent to which this has an impact upon his children, obviously, will be fascinating to see. So, the way around this is does Donald Trump suddenly start issuing a series of pardons during his last days in office? It's been speculated about whether he could even pardon himself. Quite frankly, such a shameless move would be unimaginable by any other president, but you do have to wonder whether the Department of Justice has already been asked to draw up potential pardons for the president, his family, and his advisors, just to basically give them immunity, effectively, from any legal jeopardy that he might face in a post-presidential environment.
Mm-hmm. My final question for this evening, predicated upon a theme that has run throughout our American Chronicles this year, the notion that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's ticket was fundamentally that they weren't Donald Trump. Now, if the projected victory is secure, what does the Democratic Party stand for now as it moves forward into its first presidency? How does it identify as it goes through its first 4 years under President Biden?
Well, I think that what you're going to see is that people will take from this administration what they want to see in it. If you want to, you could see a white Catholic president who is 77, if I'm not mistaken, from Delaware, a relatively small state on the eastern seaboard of the United States. Or you can focus very much upon Kamala Harris, which is what most of the networks are doing here, and talking about the unique element of her ascent to the office. Not only the first woman to hold the vice presidency, obviously she also has a very interesting heritage, an Indian mother and an African-American father, I believe. And as a result, you've got a very diverse ethnic mix in the background of the vice president, and that is very much what the networks are focusing upon, and it seems to be what a lot of the people who are out celebrating on the streets are focusing upon. Also, obviously, many people are very excited about having gotten rid of Donald Trump, but the idea that you move from a Trump presidency to a point where you have Kamala Harris as vice president of the United States seems to be one which people are drawing a great deal of joy from. Something to consider, though, is this: the extent to which those individuals who voted for the Biden-Harris ticket have done so in the appreciation that they've just elected the oldest American president in US history. And with Kamala Harris now a heartbeat away from the presidency, they have quite a different political outlook by most people's reckoning. Joe Biden, much more of a moderate. Kamala Harris from California, perhaps. I don't think she's any great, danger to the republic the way she's being portrayed, quite frankly. Neither do I think she's naturally allied with AOC, but there are certainly people who are going to start asking serious questions, I think, about whether Joe Biden will serve a full term in office, whether he'll stand for re-election in 4 years. Now you might say, well, crikey, James, we just finished one election when you're talking about something 4 years down the line. But what I can tell you is that this nation is geared up very much for campaigning and less for governing, and that there will be people who are already looking ahead, thinking about Kamala Harris being the Democratic Party nominee in 4 years' time, predicated on the basis that Joe Biden's health might prevent him from serving a second year term in office, when of course he would be 81 when he were to run for office, which was an extraordinary age, quite frankly. So I'm certainly not trying to cast a cold pail of water over this new administration before it's even taken office, or to write off Joe Biden. I think he's certainly got some interesting initiatives ahead of him, and wish him well in the presidency. Heaven knows he's been chasing it long enough. But this is a nation which always looks to the future, and pundits and politicians will already start thinking about positioning themselves for the midterms and then for the presidency to come in 2024. And I think that bodes well for Kamala Harris. She's beautifully placed, quite frankly, moving forward as the future face of the Democratic Party. Joe Biden has won the presidency, and that's great, but to a certain extent, he is a placeholder presidency. I don't think he's a transformative presidency in any way, shape, or form, but that he certainly will bring with him people who will reshape the party and the presidency, partly in their image. And I think one of the most interesting things to come from the president-elect over the last day or so is echoing words of Bill Clinton from some 30 years ago, talking about trying to bring together an administration that looks like the United States. And I have no doubt that he will do just that.